right? All right. So we're going to be looking at anger management this evening. And Aristotle, he says something interesting. He said, anybody can be angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and to the right time and to the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. So every single circumstance that we come at, right, we think that we're able to handle certain circumstances, but then all of a sudden, if you remember when we were dealing, for instance, with marriage or parenting, you can do all this planning, and you can look both ways before you cross the road, and then as you're crossing the street, an airplane hits you, right? And so how do you respond? And so sometimes it's difficult, the way we respond. And here it says that anger can cause you to hurt yourself or others physically or emotionally. Anger can make people avoid you, or worse yet, be afraid of you. Anger can contribute to feelings of depression, of loneliness, or isolation. Anger can be a factor in poor decision-making. It can also add to the list of your problems. And I'm adding one here that it can lead to regret. Sometimes we overreact or we get angry about something, and then after it's done, after we've vented and said all we want to say, what do? We end up having regret because we realize that we probably shouldn't have said it out of anger. We really didn't mean what we said. And now what are you having to do now? You're having to back yourself up. You're trying to find ways to, and so it can lead to regret. So a lot of these things, and many times anger, when we lash out, really wasn't the whole problem anyway. There was something else that was going on, wasn't there, that led to that, and the person that we vented on was innocent. And so sometimes that also can lead to regret. Early signs that are anger. I've got a brain here. It looks like it's going to be a ticking time bomb. Muscles tensing up. Clencing of your jaw or fist or tightening your shoulders. I remember when I told you that I used to work in a residential facility, and I would have young men that would come up to me, or you could see them off in the corner somewhere, and they'd be standing there like this. You knew something was up. Something was about to explode because they were clenching their fists and they were standing rigid, okay? And so then you see people that, they start face getting flush, feeling hot, noticing your heart beating faster than usual, churning or knots in your stomach, headaches, pacing, over or under eating, feelings of being sad, overwhelmed, impatient, or irritated. And so all these things are starting to kind of bubble inside of us. Right? And what do? We want to get rid of those things. So what do? We release them, right? But just like when we were dealing with depression or stress, we've got to find ways to find healthy ways to release those kinds of things rather than doing things that, as I said, lead to regret. So actually, as I've been sharing all along, the stress, all of these different things that we've been looking at, depression, the grief, even the anger management, all of these things, really that list that I gave you, those 17 things, those things can actually also be used in alleviating stress and anger. And we'll see that. So what happens? You have, again, this is just a simple model that shows that there is this escalation phase. And during this time, you have denial. Sometimes people minimize. You have this increase of hostile self-talk, intimidating body language, more frequent and intense anger, and then you go into this explosion phase where you start getting into violence, verbal aggression, uncontrollable discharge of tension, major destructiveness, and then the post-explosion phase where the worst case scenario, you end up having jail or termination from a program or firing from your job or financial loss or family loss or guilt or shame. What do you think in this model? See, it's pretty easy, really. Where do you think is the best place for you to be able to intervene, to be able to avoid regret? Where do you think it is? Yeah, the escalation phase, or where? Before, right? So that even if something does come up, we're able to respond appropriately so this escalation either doesn't happen or it's very limited. And so we need to be doing and practicing things in our lives daily so that when something does come our way, we don't have this escalation, or at least it's very minimal. We can't, it's the same thing with everything. You can't all of a sudden one day be in some certain place in your life and all of a sudden with the flick of a light switch have all the things that you need, right? You have to have been doing what? Preparing yourself for those types of things. And so it's important for us to do that. Actually, in the Bible, it talks about anger. It says in Ephesians 4:26, it says, to be angry and sin not. Neither let not the sun go down on your wrath. And it's using these Greek words. And then in Ephesians 4:31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And so it's this idea of rage, resentment, indignation. Okay? These are very dangerous things. As I said before, the rage, the resentment, and the indignation are signs of something that's already been taking place prior. These are just things that are coming out of us as a response, and we'll be talking about those. But Matthew 5, this is interesting. It says, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother and sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult, in other words, if you're saying to somebody, you good for nothing, to a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you'll be liable to the hell of fire. It's pretty strong words, isn't it? Because think about this. What this is dealing with, really, the insulting and the words. And as I shared with you before, as a parent, you are liable for your children, correct? Your children, are they not watching you? Are they not seeing how your marriage relationship is, or any of your relationships are? Are they not watching? Are they not going to grow up experiencing whatever it is that they're experiencing in this house? There's a level of accountability for you as a parent, okay? Same thing here. When I lash out in anger at somebody, it's not just me. And I used to say that same thing when I worked in the residential. A lot of kids, they would act out, and they would do things, and their response would be, well, it's just affecting me. And I would tell them, no, it's not. When you act out, it's more than just affecting you. It's affecting whoever else is hearing and seeing and experiencing what you're doing. And so we have to recognize this. So that's the same thing he's talking about here. That you're saying these things, and this is more than just you. This is actually affecting other people. And so this rage, this railing speech, this bitter reproach, we ask ourselves, well, what is the response? Then how should I respond? And the Bible continues and tells us. It says, so when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, what's it say? Be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Okay? So, do we make mistakes? We said when we were talking about parenting and marriage relationship that if I mess up, what am I supposed to do? Be willing to do? Say, I'm sorry. To come back and seek reconciliation, to seek restoration, to coexist in harmony. Well, it's the same thing with anger. Sometimes we say things and do things that we regret. It's just the reality of it. But we have to be willing to say, you know what? I messed up. So often we get so filled, and the harder, this is the thing that makes it really difficult, is if you get angry and you respond a certain way, and you don't do anything about it, and then later on you do the same thing, and the same thing, and the same thing. Now you've done, let's say you've done it 6 times. Now all of a sudden, what are you going to have to do? Now you've recognized that you actually need to reconcile. But how much hard, what's getting in the way now of you reconciling? Your pride, right? Because now you're unwilling. It would have been easy if you had done it after that one time. But now that you've done it repetitively over and over and over, it becomes more difficult for you to admit it. Because now you have a history of doing things. And so that's why God tells us, the moment you feel, the moment you see that you have done some, first thing, reconcile. First thing, seek restoration. Think about it. As I've been telling you all along, when humanity sinned, right? What was God's response? What did he seek to do to humanity as soon as they sinned? Was he not seeking to restore? Wasn't he seeking to coexist once again in harmony? If we are to be Christ-like, then Christ gives us, again, anger management, stress, all these things that we've been dealing with. Christ gives us the model of how we should respond. And when we were yet, it says when we were yet in our sins, so who was to blame? We were. You see what I'm saying here? So sometimes, even if I respond in anger and I'm right, I still need to reconcile because that was not the appropriate way in which to respond. You see what I'm saying? And so this is very important in our relationships with our spouses, with our friends, with everyone, that we need to reconcile. Matthew 12 says, "For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person brings good things out of the good treasure, and the evil person brings evil things out of evil treasure." And I tell you, on the day of judgment, you will have to what? Give an account, right? Give an account for every careless word you utter. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will also be condemned. Okay? So it's important for us then to give what? To be willing to do what? To say, you know what? I messed up. And if there's been a history of these kinds of things, maybe it's a situation where you said something to somebody and hurt their feelings. What if that person ends up dying and you don't get a chance? Does that mean it's too late now for you? Where can you then turn? Who can you ask forgiveness from? God, right? Okay? And so even if I don't give again, we should seek out those that we have done things to. But we should also ask forgiveness from God. Okay? Because again, every careless word, everything, the inner attitudes are just as important to God as the outward actions. Does that make sense? So again, even if I'm not lashing out and saying things, but I'm still thinking, you remember Jesus addresses that to the Pharisees, doesn't he? Because they came to him and they said, "Hey, committing adultery." And Jesus says, you know what? It's sin even if you do what? Think about it, right? So actually, the idea of continuing to think about something. Now, are we all tempted? Yes. But if we choose to continue to focus on those specific things, you can see it. You ever noticed it in someone? They don't have to say a word, and you can just tell in their facial expression that they are upset, that something is really weighing them down. And then you say, uh-oh, those bad words, right? You say, what's wrong? And then all of a sudden, whoosh. Oh, nice that you should ask. Whoosh, it comes out. Okay? But that's important for us to be able to do that. We have to be able to communicate. We've saw that before. Through depression and through stress and through grief, we have to talk. We have to communicate. We can't keep it inside. One of the worst things is that if you've got anger that's inside you and you harbor it and you keep it in, what does it do? It burns you up. Right? It destroys you. It's the same thing with a lot of things in our lives. We can't allow those things. And so, again, anger is an external emotion that people observe. But there's also an internal emotion that is being felt by the individual. That's why I said anger is something that comes out of because of something else. So, for instance, it can be someone who's been hurt. Now, it could be a wound. It could be, something as simple as, you just hit your finger with a nail or with a hammer, okay? But it could also be that someone has hurt you or wounded you, what? Emotionally, and you respond. Frustration or fear or guilt or shame or humiliation or depression or grief, right? We saw that if you remember from the list that we did when we were talking about grief, one of the actual steps as we go through in grief is anger, right? Is resentment. Well, also love, right? The threat of an object. So there are a lot of internal emotions that produce this anger. And as you remember, this is the one I was just talking about. Grief, we go through denial, we go through anger, we go through depression, we go through bargaining, and we go through acceptance. If you remember that when we dealt with the subject of grief and faith. Well, again, it's the same thing in our anger. If you want to go and press play on this, Michael, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this before. A little bit higher, right around here. There it is, right there. There's no volume on this. Just watch. This is a house camera. And his mail. Are you dumbfounded? This was a camera that someone must have had on their house. Can you imagine? What was going on in his... Do you think it was just because the garbage was stuck to the bottom? I mean, that is frustrating, right? When the garbage sticks to the bottom and you have to reach way down in and pull it up. That's frustrating, but not to the point where you're going to pull somebody's mailbox up, okay? So obviously, even though we're seeing the external here, there's something internally going on, okay? And so we have to recognize that. This was interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Villanova University. I was on their website, and this is through their registration, and this is really great. They actually have a section on their student life that deals with anger management, and what they have to say about it is really good. So I want to share with you what they have to say. They say that anger is a normal and basic human emotion. Depending on how it is managed and expressed, anger can have positive or negative consequences. Awareness of angry feelings can be helpful, as it can signal when our rights are being violated or our needs are being ignored by others. Anger can also help to energize and motivate us to work to address problems with another person or to change our life situation. So it goes on to say that, however, there are potential negative consequences, of anger when it is not managed or expressed appropriately or effectively. Some people are chronically angry at others or at themselves. Often, angry people were criticized or abused themselves earlier in life and react to others in the same manner that they were treated. While some people openly rage, others have difficulty acknowledging their anger and hold their feelings inside as they avoid the issue that angers them. It's interesting here because sometimes people react as they were treated themselves, right? And it's interesting, if you've ever had an opportunity when someone was really kind of releasing on you, if you stay calm when they're angry, it makes them even angrier. Why? Because they want you to come into what they're feeling and they're expressing, and they want you to respond the same way. But if you continue to stay calm, it actually, over time, will begin to calm them down, and then you can begin to communicate with each other. But it's interesting. It goes on to say that angry outbursts can be a way of trying to cope with unhappiness or depressed feelings. Chronic anger creates problems getting along with others and can lead to involvement in physically or emotionally abusive relationships. Having a short fuse is often a factor in other problematic behaviors such as road rage, accidents, and getting into verbal or physical fights. I had a kid. He had went through our program, and this was just a few years ago. And he had some real emotional issues in his life. And he went through our program, he got out, and some of the boys would still stay in contact with me even afterwards. And just a couple years ago, I was out of that in 2009, and it was just a couple years ago, he was actually on the run. The police had put out a warrant out for his arrest, and he was on the run, and he called me while he was running because he had beat up his girlfriend, and he was being chased by the police, and he asked me what he should do, and I told him to turn himself in. To man up to it and turn himself in, it's going to be far better on you to turn yourself in than to continue to run, and who knows what it may end up turning into. And he ended up turning himself in and such. But again, did he want a relationship? Yes. Did he want a healthy relationship? Yes. Did he want to be loved? Yes. But then he expressed those things in his frustration and anger that ended up destroying, and that's been something that's continuing to happen to him in every relationship that he's been in. It's almost as if he's sabotaging all of those relationships based on the experience that he had in his past. And so a lot of these things we have to deal with those things. So if there are things that are in our lives, we have to deal with them. We just can't sweep them under the rug. We just can't keep them inside because, again, they're going to continue to come out. They're going to continue to turn into some of these external behaviors, these angers and emotional things. I want you to watch this short clip as well. This was Williams' 12 Strategies for Controlling Aggression. It was really good. It's only about 2 or 3 minutes.
Anger is a perfectly normal emotion. It's so powerful that it can move people to do great things, but misplaced or frequent anger can destroy your relationships, limit your creativity, and even damage your health. There are lots of potentially anger-inducing situations at work, from the frustration of your computer not working properly to the bitterness of losing your job. So how do you manage anger? This is where Drs. Redford and Virginia Williams' 12 strategies for controlling aggression are very useful. When you have these strategies in your toolbox, you can lessen your chances of getting angry and manage your emotions when you do. So let's look at how you can control anger more effectively. Sometimes the hardest step is to acknowledge that there is a problem, but it's important to do so as this helps to strengthen your intention to better manage your anger. Next, download our hostility log worksheet and use it to identify what makes you angry. It's also a good idea to let the important people in your life know that you're trying to change your behavior and ask them for their support. So whenever you find yourself getting angry, interrupt the moment by thinking, stop. Focus on the facts of the situation or force yourself to picture something calm and enjoyable. Then use empathy to see the situation from the other person's perspective, and you could even learn to laugh at yourself to diffuse the tension. Help prevent yourself getting angry in the first place by relaxing. Habits like exercising regularly and getting enough sleep keep us centered and more able to deal with difficult situations. Anger is also less likely to flare if you're true to your word, listen effectively to your coworkers, and set your boundaries clearly. This way, you'll avoid irritating misunderstandings and prove that you can be trusted. Finally, modify your thoughts and beliefs about what's really important to you. For example, if you live each day as if it's your last, you're unlikely to allow anger to steal your and others' happiness. Similarly, don't hold on to resentment. Instead, forgive and forget. The long-term benefits of simply choosing not to get angry are excellent working relationships, good decision-making, and a healthier life. For more information on Williams' strategies and for a link to our self-test on anger management, see the article that accompanies this video.
So let's look at what he just identified here. So he said we have to acknowledge that you have a problem, right? This is the first thing we got to do. We got to be willing to say, you know what, there is something that I need to deal with. And so acknowledging that. It's even part of the stages of change, right? I cannot tell you that you need to change. Because if I tell you as someone on the outside that you need to change, typically you're going to become stronger in your position because someone else is pointing it out. Change happens because you recognize that change is necessary. So here in this model, then, we have to acknowledge that there's a problem. Keep a hostility log. You know, I can provide one if you're wanting, but it's really simple what you do. You're just writing down it. It's like journaling, right? You're journaling what is taking place. And I told you that writing and journaling is a really good way to reinforce what it is that we want to do. And then there has to be a support system. There has to be somebody that we can go to. Again, don't think that you're on your own. If you're on your own, then you're never really dealing with whatever it is that you're dealing with. And so having a support system, having someone that you can talk to, and then interrupting the anger cycle. If you recognize that you're getting angry, take yourself out of the situation. Don't allow yourself to continue. Say, okay, you know what? I need to stop. I need to take a break. I'm going to come back and address this. I'm not going to sweep it under the rug, but I'm going to break away for a minute so I can collect my thoughts so that I don't say something that I'm going to regret, and then re-engage the subject. So again, we've got to be able to break that cycle. Use empathy, right? See the humor in your anger. Sometimes, you know, how many of you have ever been at a party or a get-together where people are sharing some of the things that you've done in your past that you probably aren't too proud of? Or they were situations where you were like overreacted and were extremely angry, but now you're able to look at that and you're all sitting around laughing about it, right? So again, it's the idea of seeing the humor in these things and recognizing, you know, when this is all said and done, I'm probably going to make a total fool out of myself in the process. So being able to see the humor in those things and relaxing, right? Sometimes if you see yourself being stressed or you see yourself, one of the things that you can do is take a deep breath. Now you got to let it out, right? You don't hold it. But you, in through the nose and out through the mouth, it allows you to actually reset yourself and allows you to relax. Building trust is one of the ones that he said, and listening effectively. If someone is angry and they're sharing with you that they're angry, what do you think they're going to respond if you keep interrupting them, or you keep saying that what they should do or how they should respond, or what, all these kind of things? What's that going to do? Is that going to help alleviate the anger, or is that going to feed it? That's going to feed it. So sometimes we need to just zip it up and listen through. Let them express whatever it is that they're going through. And so we need to listen. Be assertive, right? We have to be assertive. What this means when it says live each day as if it's your last, I think that's regret. Because if I were to die today, my response to things is going to be different. Because I don't want to have a legacy that's left. Those are the last things that I ever said. You ever watch those movies where something happens and a husband and a wife are getting in this huge argument, then the wife and the kids goes in a car and she ends up getting hit and killed, and now the husband has post-traumatic stress because the last thing he remembers doing with his wife and his kids was screaming at them on the way out the door. Okay, so it's the same thing here. We have to recognize that, you know what, I'm not going to allow these things to affect me because I may have regrets, some of those that I may never be able to deal with. And then forgive and forget. And so, again, sometimes if the things are strong enough, they're still a part of us, right? But we're not allowing them, we're able to move forward, and we're not allowing those things to impact us. Again, we can't get rid of the things that have happened to us. We're not brainwashing ourselves, but we're able to deal with those things and go forward. And so this is the kind of thing you can do. So you can write down things like, what made you angry? My husband. How did I respond? I yelled at him. Was this justified? No. How about another one? Again, it's my husband again. This time I slammed the door. And what's your response? Was this this time you say, yeah, it was justified. I don't know. And then you say, my husband, again. How did you respond? I went shopping. I'm not going to give you the answer to that one. Okay? I'm not going to say yes or no, because I'll get myself in trouble with my own spouse. All right? But again, you could say husband, you could say boss, you could say whatever it is. And again, this can be part of what you're writing in your journaling too. And you want to get to the place where you're actually seeing change happening. And the same thing we saw with stress and other things, be what? Patient with the process. It's not going to happen overnight, but continue to work forward. It says, this is interesting when you're studying the brain. It says when we get angry, the amygdala, right, actually circled in red, as you can see here, responds rapidly. And if you ask a lot of people how to reduce feelings of anger, about 2/3 of them are going to claim that venting is a productive strategy. Now, if you remember, last time I showed you that video, it wasn't on our rest, but when it was dealing with stress. You remember that? Where the people were going down in Dallas, and they had those rooms where they had hammers, and they could smash TVs and smash tables, and I told you that it sounds like something interesting, and it's really spreading. But the problem is that you can't keep going to this place and spending $40 to smash up stuff. You have to find something that you can implement, that you can use on a daily basis, right? That's dealing with what's going inside your body. This is probably something, any of us, you don't have to raise your hand, but some of us sometimes have that road rage, or that person who drives us crazy when we're trying to drive. I've had some that have have flipped me off and have rolled down their windows and said stuff. I remember one time just a few years ago, before I became a pastor, not that that makes any difference, but this guy, I was waiting at an intersection, and this guy was coming, and he felt that because what this intersection was, you couldn't see around the corner, so I stopped at the stop sign, and I crept up so that I could see around, and the guy came in his truck, but he didn't like that I was too far up to see around, and when he came around, did a wide turn, he stopped and rolled his window down and began to just swear profanities, wicked, nasty stuff. And in his passenger seat was his 5 or 6 year old son that was sitting there. And so I rolled down my window and I said, what a great role model you are. You're sitting there and you're saying, and again, I didn't respond the way he was. I said, what a great role model you are. I said, you've got your child that's there in your car listening to you responding in this way. What a great role model you are. And then I just I went on my way. But again, this is, some crazy stuff. If you've been in any traffic around here, right, you get in certain areas of York. I don't know, I've bitten my steering wheel a few times with some of the crazy stuff that goes on around here too. But actual research shows that one of the most successful anger management practice is to what? Talk it out. Talk out an issue with the person involved. Now, is this talking it out? No. Is this what some people are doing? Yes. You know, my dad actually told me years ago he had a situation where there was a guy that was riding on his bumper, and it was getting to such a place where my dad pulled over. And he got out of his vehicle, and the guy pulled over and got out of his and grabbed it and came out of his car with a tire iron. And my dad said he got back in his car and went on his way. But again, this stuff has happened before. When my wife and I, when we were in Texas, there was a thing on the news about the same thing where these two people were riding each other. Finally, the guy pulled over, and he walked up to the guy and asked him to roll down his window. And in the process of the guy ended up grabbing a gun and shot and killed him through the door. You know, this is not an appropriate way to handle these kinds of things. And this is one type of thing, but in all of our anger issues, we have to be careful we don't allow ourselves to do things that we're going to regret. So we have to give ourselves a break from the environment, right? This reaction, it's going to die quickly. So follow one of the identified strategies that works for you, or negotiate, right? Look at certain things. Again, it's not all or nothing. It's finding those things that work for you. Each of us is different. Now, one of the things that I remember, and people have used this term before, is righteous indignation. And you say, well, wait a second. You're saying that it's okay to flip over tables and do what Jesus did. Well, what was it that Jesus was really doing? And one of the things that I'm going to use as an example is from my own life again. And I'll share this with you. Back in my high school days, it wasn't on purpose. I was in a boarding school, and I happened to walk into a class. It wasn't a class. It was a classmate's room. We were in the dorm. And when I came in there, they were doing, I wouldn't say they were worshiping the devil, but they were messing around with devil worship stuff. They were trying to put the key of Daniel and trying to open up the gates of hell and all this kind of stuff. And I walked in, and I walked out. But that very night, I went to bed, and during the night, I had a dream. And in this dream, I felt like I had been filled with Satan or an evil demon or something, and I screamed. And I screamed so loud that it woke me from my sleep. And my roommate was in there, and he was above me in his bunk, and he said to me, it woke him up because I screamed so loud, and he said that I screamed in someone else's voice that wasn't my own. And now, after that experience, I also remember the room being kind of a greenish, hazy, kind of a cold feeling when this experience happened to me. Okay, let me fast forward now. In 2008, at the birth of my daughter, I was at home. This was when we were living in Indiana. I was at home, and I woke up during the night, and guess what the room was? It had been 25 years since my high school days. And all of a sudden, the room was exactly the same. It was almost like I was like, whoosh, taken back in time to my high school days. I had the same coloring. I had the same chill. I had the same experience. And my daughter was in her crib crying. And I was spooked by it because all of a sudden I'm brought back to that experience that I had when I was younger. And I got up. My wife didn't know, didn't tell her. I got up and I began to walk around my house, putting my hands on all the doors of my house, telling Satan that he's not welcome in this house. And after that, I had no more problems. In 2010, at the birth of my son, I woke up in the middle of the night, and the same thing happened again. This time, this is where the righteous indignation set in. I got out of my bed this time, and as I went around from door to door, I was angry because I said to Satan, how dare you come into my house? I have already asked in Jesus' name that you're not welcome. How dare you come back inside my house? And I went from door to door, and I was seething. I was angry. This is what I believe righteous indignation is. It's the type of anger that when you see things that you know are wrong, and these things are being done despite what those things are, the feelings that you have of anger towards those things, I believe is righteous. And that's what I was feeling. But that's how I would describe righteous indignation. But again, how we respond is also important. Even though I'm having those feelings, and even though I was angry, and even though I was going to those doors and saying, how dare you, you're not welcome in this house, I still did it in a calm way. Does that make sense? Because I trusted in the blood of Christ. Because when I went around those doors, it wasn't me saying, you're not welcome. I was saying, you know what? Jesus Christ is the one that protects this house, and He is the one that guards this house, and He is the one that keeps you out. How dare you come back inside this house? And I went around the house. So in our lives, there are times where there are going to be things that we know are blatantly against God. To be filled with anger over those things is appropriate, just like Christ did when He came into the temple and saw what they were doing in there. And He says, stop making my house, right? Which is supposed to be a house of prayer, a den of robbers, of thieves, and all these things. And so it's important for us to recognize those things. So going back to Villanova, so in their student life section, again, it says, if you have problems with anger, the following strategies can help. Learn to become more aware of what you are feeling and recognize your anger when it occurs. Notice your particular signs that anger is building, where you start seeing these things. So again, you're intervening prior to out of control, okay? And you're using those coping skills. And so you ask yourself, what's really bothering me? Notice whether it is an interaction with someone else or something inside you. Avoid displacing your anger toward individuals who are not the cause of your anger. That's important. Keep an angry log, as we said, to identify the kinds of situations that provoke you. Learn to identify what triggers anger. Okay? Sometimes there may be something that triggers you. If you like things to go a certain way and things aren't going your way. If you feel that your integrity is something that's very important to you, and then someone is calling into question your integrity that makes you angry, figure out what are those things that are triggers for you so that you can do those things and put things in place that you can avoid. And see and recognize the consequences of your behavior. Learn what underlying emotions might lead you to get angry. And so, as I said, feeling of rejection or powerlessness. And so those are important. De-escalate with a timeout when you recognize the signs of anger. Let significant others know that you may need to walk away to calm down when you're really angry. Take a deep breath. Go to a quiet place and continue to use deep breathing to calm down. It's okay to do that. It's okay to say, I need some time here. Okay? And if the person doesn't understand that, well, they will over time, because if they don't understand it and all they do is follow you around, when you're trying to get time to yourself and all they're doing is following you, they're going to learn pretty quickly that that's not the right thing. But maybe you've experienced that before, where you just want some time away and they just keep following you around. Keep yelling, keep screaming, and so it's going to cause problems. Examine your options for behaving when you are angry and visualize how you might respond. Recognize that you're responsible for your anger. Situations may contribute to your feeling angry, but you are responsible for how you behave. You may be legitimately and appropriately frustrated, but you don't have to inappropriately be hostile or hurtful to others. You are bigger than your feelings, and you can make choices about how you respond. Work on developing more positive behaviors to replace the negative ones. And 6, it says, learn how to assert yourself and talk to the person who is triggering your anger. Use the physical and mental energy that is generated from feeling angry to channel your response to the situation. Help the person to see how their behavior is affecting you in a way that they can hear and that is not threatening. Use I statements that describe how you feel rather than accusing the other person. So what are we saying here? Communication, right? You're telling people how you're feeling. Hey, you know what? I'm feeling this way. Maybe we should stop here for a minute. Give me a second to try to search out what it is that I'm dealing with here, and then we can come back together and talk about this. You've got to be able to do those kinds of things. Recognize that it's your responsibility to express yourself appropriately to others, but it's their responsibility to deal with their own feelings in response. Seek support of others when you are struggling with anger. Cultivate a sense of humor. We talked about this. Humor can lighten things up. Develop activities that help you cope with anger. Exercise, as we said, can help diminish those feelings of agitation and frustration. Practicing relaxation techniques on a daily basis can also help in coping with anger. Exercise, I'll tell you, exercise is one of my coping skills. Try to get out to the gym, work out, release those kinds of things. If it's a matter of going out and walking, if you're into running, whatever those kinds of things, exerting energy can help you to release some of those things. And obviously, avoid alcohol, drugs, and I share with you it's the same thing with stress and anxiety. Also avoid caffeine. Those kinds of things are also causing a lot of problems. 12, it says that anger problems can be related to family experiences. How was anger expressed in your family? And how were you affected by significant others? If anger was expressed in destructive and hurtful ways, think about how you felt when you were physically or verbally attacked, criticized, shunned, or ignored. Consider the effects of your present relationships with others if you are perpetuating this same pattern. People tell me, well, that's what I was born into. And that's why I love the song that they sang this evening. Because it tells me that even though there have been ways that I have seen and experienced things in my house, that I am not bound by those things. That just because my father was this way, my grandfather was this way, or my mother was this way, or my grandmother was this way, or my sister or my brother, I can't use those as excuses. Are they valid in some way? Yes. But I don't use them as excuses because I can break free, right? Through the power of God, I can break free from these things. I don't have to be bound by these things at all. It kind of reminds me of the story in Genesis chapter 4. You remember the story of Cain and Abel. Adam slept with his wife. She conceived and had Cain, then had another baby, Abel. And he was a herdsman and Cain was a farmer. Time passed. Cain brought an offering to God from the produce of his farm. Abel also brought an offering, but from the firstborn animals of his herd, choice cuts of meat. God liked Abel and his offering, but Cain and his offering didn't get his approval. So Cain lost his temper and went into a sulk. God spoke to Cain. He says, why this tantrum? Why the sulking? If you do well, won't you be accepted? And if you don't do well, sin is lying in wait for you, ready to pounce. It's out to get you. You've got to master it. Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go out to the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and did what? So God intervened, didn't he? God intervened in that circumstance. He kind of, in essence, pulled him aside and gave him an opportunity to see what he was doing and what he was not doing. But in response, rather than listening, what did he do? He took matter in his own hand. He allowed the anger to do things that ended up having consequences, didn't it? Okay? And so facing discipline, Cain said to God there in Genesis 4:13, my punishment is too much. I can't take it. You've thrown me off the land and I can never again face you. I'm a homeless wanderer on earth and whoever finds me will kill me. Well, God, didn't he already talk to him beforehand? So why in the world is he saying, this is too much for me? I've shared with you before, oftentimes when we do things, again, pride steps in, and we start to justify or make excuses for our behavior. And so Cain chose the course of self-dependence. Cain obeyed in building an altar, obeyed in bringing a sacrifice, but he rendered only a partial obedience. The essential part, the recognition of the need of a redeemer, was left out. And that's why I said throughout this entire series that we have to recognize that, yes, there are things that you and I can do, coping skills that we can do, that can help. But we have to have Christ in that too. Because if we leave him out, we're going to make choices that we're going to regret. It's kind of like using the analogy of a tree with apples. We oftentimes focus on the bad apples, thinking that removing the bad apples resolves the problem. You know what I'm talking about? So if I have anger issues, if I have stress issues, if I have these kinds of issues, I get into this pattern where I'm trying just to remove the bad apples. But is that really the problem with the tree? Why is the tree producing bad apples? Right? It's because it's not the tree that's the problem. It's the roots that's the problem. And so we need to get to the, well, no pun intended, we need to get to the root of the problem, right? Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, for as a person thinks in their heart, what is it? so are they, right? And so we want Christ to be in us. And so the more that Christ increases in us, the more we're going to respond the way in which we should respond. And so that's why I tell people that even though these are good coping skills that we can put in place, we want to increase in God in our lives so that when we're faced with certain things, we'll respond appropriately because it's God that's in us. And so we must conduct ourselves with purity of motive and intent based on God's word. Hebrews 4 says this. It says, "For the word of God is alive and powerful. It is sharper than a two-edged sword, cutting between soul and spirit, between joint and marrow. It exposes our innermost thoughts and desires. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before His eyes. And He is the one to whom we are accountable." He sees everything, doesn't He? So even though we may be harboring these things and we're not showing them externally, God still knows, doesn't He? God still knows. And so the Word needs to be inside us, right? Because we are accountable to God for our actions. I like this. Proverbs 25, verse 28 says, "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." What is it? It's vulnerable, isn't it? It's vulnerable. And who is there waiting to pounce? The adversary, isn't he? He knows our weaknesses, doesn't he? He knows those things that we're going to do. I love this one too. Proverbs 16:32 says, "Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." I like that one too. 2 Corinthians 5:17 was summed up as this: "God formed us, sin deformed us, Jesus transforms us." Right? And that's what we want, isn't it? We want Jesus to come inside our lives and transform us. Because if we do not allow God to transform us, we will find ourselves repeating the past over and over and over again. And we want freedom, don't we? That's why I like this. Transformation happens where? On the other side of surrender. And so that's what we want to do, isn't it? We want to surrender ourselves to God. And it's not just in anger management. It's in everything, isn't it? The Bible tells us that I want you to give all your cares to God, doesn't it? I want you to surrender to me. I want you to allow me to be in control of your life. And I've always said this, that I want God to grow in my life, and all of those other things in my life will grow proportionally. We've got to get out of the habit of thinking that I've got to work on this and work on this and work on this. Even though there are some things that we can put in place to improve those things, what we want most is for God to dwell in our hearts. And all we need to do is surrender to Him. Pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, that's what each of us desires. We've been looking at anger and many of the ways in which we show our anger. And we've shown some things that we can put in place that can help us to avoid those times of which we regret. Lord, we've been looking at a lot of things. We've looked at depression. We've looked at stress. We've looked at grief. We've looked at parenting. We've looked at rest. We've looked at marriage. And all the way through, weaved through it all, woven through it all, is your presence. And Lord, once again, here we are, faced with a decision. And we recognize that we are human beings and we are weak by nature, and that change is something that we struggle with. It's something that we are uncomfortable with. But Lord, I just ask that each person here, the one change that they can make today is to surrender their will to you. And Lord, I ask that each and every day going forward that we would continue each and every day to surrender more and more to you, so that you can continue to fill us up, so that no matter what's thrown our way, that we will respond in a Christ-like manner because Christ is in us. So I just ask that you continue to be with each person here as they grow in their relationship with you. Again, we love you so much. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.